The sound of flesh meeting flesh echoes through the dimly lit room. Blood trickles from Marcus Johnson's split lip as his stepfather towers over him, leather belt still quivering in his white-knuckled grip. The heavy brass buckle swings menacingly, catching the fading evening light that filters through dusty Venetian blinds. The offense? A dropped fork at dinner. A simple accident that spiraled into another lesson in an endless series of violent teachings that have shaped Marcus's 17 years of life. The dining room, with its faded wallpaper and worn wooden chairs, transforms into a chamber of horrors every time Marcus makes the slightest mistake. The old grandfather clock in the corner ticks away, marking each second of his torment, its steady rhythm a cruel reminder of how time seems to slow during these disciplinary sessions. His mother, Sarah Johnson, stands frozen in the doorway, her silence a betrayal that cuts deeper than any belt ever could. She watches, arms crossed tightly across her chest, fingers digging into her own flesh, as she convinces herself that this brutality will mold her son into someone more obedient, more acceptable to a world that has already judged him by the color of his skin. Her wedding ring catches the light as she wrings her hands, the diamond his stepfather gave her now seeming more like a price paid for her complicity. "Look at me when I'm teaching you, boy," Robert Thompson, his stepfather, demands. The man's face is flushed red with exertion and anger, his tie loosened but still hanging around his neck like a noose of respectability. The smell of expensive whiskey mingles with his cologne, the same cologne Marcus once gave him for Father's Day in a futile attempt to win his approval. Marcus raises his eyes, meeting his stepfather's gaze. His dark brown eyes, so like his real father's, hold a depth of rage that makes Robert take an involuntary step back. But the moment passes, and Robert's grip on the belt tightens. "Shake my hand, boy," his stepfather demands, extending his pale fingers toward Marcus. "Show me you've learned your lesson." The ritual of reconciliation, a twisted tradition that forces Marcus to thank his abuser, to accept the violence as necessary and just. Marcus reaches out, his dark hand engulfing his stepfather's in a grip that's just tight enough to be uncomfortable, but not enough to provoke another round of discipline. His eyes, however, tell a different story, one of simmering rage and promises of retribution. The contrast between their skin tones seems to emphasize everything wrong in this house, in this family, in this society. The violence at home breeds more violence. At Riverside High School, Marcus becomes what they expect him to be, the angry black kid with a chip on his shoulder. He fights back against racist taunts and microaggressions, his fists doing what his words cannot. Teachers look the other way when white students provoke him but are quick to write him up for any reaction. His permanent record grows thick with incidents, each one carefully documented to paint a picture of a problem student. One day he snaps. His friend Trevor, one of the few who still talks to him, makes one joke too many about acting white when Marcus aces another test. The words hit harder than any belt, coming from someone he thought understood him. The red haze descends, and when it finally clears, Trevor lies unconscious on the polished hallway floor, blood pooling beneath his head while other students stand frozen in fear, their phones recording every moment of Marcus's downfall. The principal, Dr. Harrison, sits behind his massive mahogany desk, not even pretending to hear Marcus's side of the story. The office walls are lined with diplomas and awards, symbols of an education system that seems designed to fail students like Marcus. "This kind of savage behavior," he says, emphasizing the word savage while staring directly into Marcus's eyes, "has no place in our institution. The expulsion is immediate and final, delivered with the same casual racism that Marcus has faced every day of his life." That evening, Marcus returns home to face another beating, this one longer and more brutal than usual. His stepfather, emboldened by the expulsion, takes particular pleasure in teaching him about the consequences of his actions. The brass buckle leaves new scars to join the constellation already marking Marcus's back, a map of pain etched into his dark skin. His mother, desperate to salvage her son's future, waits until Robert leaves for his night shift at the hospital, where he works as a chief surgeon. In the quiet of their living room, surrounded by photographs of a family that only looks happy on the surface, she reveals her plan. Walking to the antique cabinet that has always been off-limits to Marcus, she unlocks it with trembling hands. Inside lies her most precious possession, a collection of African art passed down through 5 generations, each piece telling the story of their heritage. Masks from Mali, sculptures from Nigeria, beadwork from Kenya, a treasure trove of cultural history that her grandmother had smuggled out piece by piece during the colonial era. "This was supposed to be your inheritance," she whispers, carefully lifting a ceremonial mask. "But your future is more important than our past." Her voice breaks as she explains how she's already found a buyer, an art collector who's offered enough to create an educational fund that could change Marcus's life. The next day, she arranges a meeting with Richard Blackwood, an old friend from her college days and now a prominent civil rights attorney. They meet at a small cafe far from their neighborhood, where Robert won't accidentally discover them. Richard, his gray-streaked dreadlocks tied back neatly, radiates an air of quiet authority that immediately commands Marcus's respect. "Your mother tells me you've had some troubles," Richard says, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. He doesn't judge, doesn't lecture, just listens as Marcus finally tells his story. All of it, including the abuse at home that his mother didn't know he'd mention. Sarah Johnson stifles a sob when Marcus removes his jacket, showing the fresh welts from last night's lesson. Richard's face darkens with controlled anger. He reaches into his briefcase and pulls out a business card, pressing it firmly into Marcus's hand. "When you need help, or not if, but when you call me. We have to stick together. Our people have survived worse, and you will too." The solution, it turns out, is already in motion. Marcus's mother has enrolled him in Whitehaven Academy, an elite all-boys boarding school 3 states away. Known for its prestigious alumni and old money connections, Whitehaven represents both an opportunity and a challenge. Out of 800 students, Marcus will be only the 3rd black student currently enrolled. "It's your last chance at graduation," his mother explains, showing him the brochure with its photos of manicured lawns and Gothic architecture. "But it's also a chance to get away from here." She doesn't need to finish the sentence. They both know she means Robert, though neither dares to say it aloud. The day Marcus leaves for Whitehaven, his stepfather doesn't even come downstairs to say goodbye. The silence from upstairs is both a blessing and a final insult. His mother hugs him tightly, whispering prayers and promises into his ear. "Be strong," she says. "Be smart. And remember who you are." The drive to Whitehaven takes 6 hours, each mile putting welcome distance between Marcus and his stepfather's belt. The campus, when it finally comes into view, looks like something out of a British period drama. All ivy-covered walls and stone towers reaching toward the clouds. But beneath its picturesque exterior, Marcus will soon discover that Whitehaven harbors its own forms of violence, more subtle but no less destructive than his stepfather's belt. As Marcus walks through Whitehaven's imposing iron gates, rolling his single battered suitcase behind him, he feels the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. Students lounging on the perfectly manicured lawn stop their conversations mid-sentence. A group of boys playing frisbee freeze in place, the disc forgotten in mid-throw. The silence is deafening, broken only by whispered comments he pretends not to hear. Is he lost? Must be a scholarship case. Probably here for the sports program. There goes the neighborhood. The administration building, with its gleaming brass fixtures and oak paneling, smells of old money and privilege. The secretary, Mrs. Pembroke, peers at him over her gold-rimmed glasses with barely concealed disdain as she hands him his schedule and room assignment. Her French manicured nails click against the desk as she explains the school's zero-tolerance policy for misconduct, her emphasis making it clear exactly who she expects to violate these rules. If you're enjoying this story of resilience and justice, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. There's much more to come, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Marcus's room is in Lancaster Hall, the oldest dormitory on campus. The stone building looms over him like a medieval fortress as he climbs the worn marble stairs to the 3rd floor. Room 317 is at the end of a long corridor lined with portraits of distinguished alumni, all white faces staring down at him with painted expressions of superiority. His roommate is already there when he arrives. James Chun looks up from his laptop, genuine surprise crossing his face. As one of only 5 Asian students at Whitehaven, James knows exactly what it means to be an outsider here. His desk is meticulously organized, textbooks arranged by size, color-coded notebooks stacked perfectly aligned. "You must be Marcus," James says, standing to shake his hand. "I'm James. Top of the class if you care about that sort of thing." Which most people here definitely do. His smile is genuine, tinged with a hint of irony that suggests he knows exactly how ridiculous some of Whitehaven's traditions are. As Marcus unpacks his meager belongings, James fills him in on the unwritten rules of their new home. The social hierarchy is rigid and clearly defined. At the top are the legacy students, sons of alumni whose families have been sending their boys to Whitehaven for generations. Below them are the new money kids, trying desperately to buy their way into old money respectability. Then come the scholarship students, the athletes, and at the very bottom, the few minority students who've managed to break through the invisible barriers. "But don't worry," James says with a wry smile. "Being my roommate automatically makes you somewhat interesting. They'll at least learn your name before they try to destroy you." As night falls, they make their way to the dining hall for dinner. The massive room looks like something out of Harry Potter, with long wooden tables, chandeliers, and stained glass windows depicting scenes from classical mythology. Marcus follows James through the food line, acutely aware of the stares and whispers that follow them. That's when he meets David Washington, one of the other 2 black students. David quickly pulls him aside, his expression serious. "Listen carefully," he whispers, eyes darting around the ornate dining hall. "This place operates on a strict social hierarchy, and people like us, we're at the bottom no matter what we achieve. You need to understand that fast if you want to survive here." Before David can finish his warning, a commotion erupts at the far end of their table. Alexander Winchester III and William Rothschild, or Lex, and Will, as they insist on being called, are harassing a scholarship student about his cheap uniform from the school's second-hand shop. Their families' names grace buildings across campus, and their positions on the student council make them untouchable. Lex and Will's taunting of the scholarship student grows louder, their privileged voices carrying across the dining hall. The victim, a thin boy named Thomas, hunches lower in his seat, trying to disappear. Marcus watches, his hands clenching into fists under the table, remembering all too well what it feels like to be powerless. "Hey, new kid," Lex calls out, noticing Marcus's reaction. "Since you seem so interested in our conversation, why don't you come over here? We should properly welcome Whitehaven's newest diversity edition." The dining hall falls silent. Even the teachers at their separate table pretend not to notice, suddenly very interested in their meals. James touches Marcus's arm in warning, but Marcus is already standing. The legs of his chair scrape against the ancient hardwood floor, the sound echoing like a challenge. "I have a better idea," Marcus responds, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed room. "Why don't you focus on your own plate? Seems like you've got enough on it already." He stares pointedly at the stack of papers peeking from Lex's bag, assignments marked with angry red FS. Scattered snickers break out across the hall. Lex's face flushes red, but Will holds him back. "Careful, Lex." Will murmurs, just loud enough to be heard. "Remember what Daddy said about another suspension." The tension breaks, but Marcus knows this is just the beginning. As he and James leave the dining hall, David catches up with them. "You've got guts," he says, "but you just painted a target on your back." They never fight fair, and they never forget. Later that night, James offers Marcus a cigarette behind Lancaster Hall. "For the nerves," he explains. Marcus initially declines, remembering his promise to his mother to stay out of trouble. But when James mentions the blind spots in the school's security cameras, Marcus gives in. The smoke burns his throat, but the nicotine helps calm his racing thoughts. Their peace is interrupted by the arrival of Sophia Martinez, one of the kitchen staff. She's young, perhaps in her mid-20s, and her presence immediately changes the atmosphere. "You boys shouldn't be smoking," she says. But there's a hint of understanding in her voice. She looks at Marcus with particular interest. "You remind me of my brother." He had the same fire in his eyes. Over the next few weeks, Marcus falls into a routine. Classes are challenging but manageable. His teachers seem surprised when he excels, their raised eyebrows and backhanded compliments revealing their low expectations. Lex and Will continue their campaign of subtle harassment, but Marcus refuses to give them the satisfaction of a response. His relationship with Sophia grows closer. She leaves him extra portions at meals, offers him a sympathetic ear, and sometimes joins him during his late-night cigarette breaks. Their connection deepens, despite both knowing that any romantic relationship between staff and students is strictly forbidden. The autumn term proceeds without major incident until the Halloween ball. Lex and Will, drunk on stolen champagne and their own sense of superiority, decide to escalate their torment. They corner Marcus in a darkened corridor, flanked by their usual gang of sycophants. "You think you belong here?" Lex slurs, shoving Marcus against the wall. "Your kind will never belong here. This is our place, our legacy." For a moment, Marcus sees red. His stepfather's face overlays Lex's, and his fists itch to strike back. But Sophia's words from the night before echo in his mind. "You're better than them. Don't let them make you prove otherwise." Instead of fighting, Marcus laughs, a genuine, pitying laugh that confuses his attackers more than any punch could have. "Your legacy?" he says, straightening his jacket. "The only legacy I see is a scared little boy hiding behind his daddy's name. Keep it. I'm here to build my own." He walks away, leaving them stunned. But that night, as he lies in bed listening to James's steady breathing from across the room, Marcus knows the real fight is just beginning. He takes out Richard Blackwood's business card, running his fingers over the embossed letters. Not yet, he thinks, but soon. Marcus staring out his dormitory window at the moon rising over Whitehaven's ancient spires. In his mind, he can hear his mother's voice. "Be strong. Be smart. Remember who you are." He makes a silent promise, not just to survive this place, but to change it. The winter term at Whitehaven brings more than just snow to the ancient campus. It brings a shift in power dynamics that no one sees coming. Marcus arrives back from Christmas break with fresh welts on his back. His stepfather's idea of a holiday greeting, but something has changed in his eyes. The fear is gone, replaced by cold determination. Sophia notices the change first. During one of their secret meetings in the kitchen storage room, she traces the new scars on his back with gentle fingers. "Your silence," she whispers. "It's different now. What are you planning?" Marcus just kisses her in response, but his mind is already calculating the steps ahead. The catalyst comes during a bitter January morning. Lex and Will have grown bolder, their harassment of scholarship students escalating from verbal taunts to physical intimidation. They corner Thomas, the same scholarship student from the dining hall, in the gymnasium locker room. But this time they go too far. James finds Thomas curled up in a shower stall, his uniform torn, nose bleeding, and the word peasant written across his chest in permanent marker. When he helps Thomas to the nurse's office, the official report calls it a roughhousing incident. The nurse, meeting James's eyes, mouths "I'm sorry," as she writes down the prescribed explanation. Marcus watches Thomas pack his bags that night, his hands shaking as he folds his second-hand uniform for the last time. "My parents," Thomas explains. "They can't afford to fight the school. Lex's father is on the board of trustees. It's better if I just leave." That night, Marcus calls Richard Blackwood. "Document everything," the lawyer advises. "Every incident, every witness, every teacher who looks the other way. We need to prove this is systematic. And Marcus, be careful. Places like Whitehaven don't change easily, and they fight dirty when threatened. If you're as invested in this fight for justice as Marcus is, make sure to hit that subscribe button. This story of resistance and redemption is just getting started. Marcus begins his resistance systematically. With James's help, He creates an encrypted digital document recording every incident of discrimination and abuse. They install hidden cameras in common areas where Lex and Will frequently corner their victims. Sophia, risking her job, provides access to staff areas where students hide from their tormentors. But their investigation reveals something even darker. The abuse isn't just student-on-student violence. It's an institutionalized system of oppression. Legacy students are given advance copies of tests. Minority students' papers are graded more harshly. Scholarship students are intentionally excluded from academic competitions that could lead to college scholarships. David, who initially warned Marcus about the hierarchy, becomes their inside source to the black student experience at Whitehaven. They accepted us for the photos, he explains during a secret meeting in the library's forgotten basement level. We're just props in their diversity brochures. The turning point comes during the prestigious Whitehaven debate competition. Marcus, despite maintaining top grades, is relegated to timekeeper. But when Lex, who's supposed to deliver the keynote debate, shows up drunk from a pre-event celebration, Marcus sees his opportunity. He approaches the debate moderator, Mr. Phillips, with a proposition. Either let me take Lex's place, he says quietly, or I'll make sure every parent in that audience knows exactly why their star debater can barely stand. Phillips, seeing Lex swaying slightly at his podium, reluctantly agrees. The debate topic is, ironically, the role of traditional institutions in modern society. Marcus delivers a masterful argument, systematically dismantling the very foundations that Whitehaven stands upon. Without ever mentioning the school directly, he exposes the rot that privilege and unchecked power create. The audience, including several board members, sits in stunned silence. He wins first place. The backlash is immediate. Lex and Will's retaliation comes that night. They send a group of their followers to trash Marcus and James's room. But Marcus has anticipated this. The hidden camera captures everything, including the moment when Will explicitly states, "This is what happens when you don't know your place, boy." Sophia witnesses the aftermath. Seeing Marcus's destroyed belongings, including a photo of his father, the only one he had, something breaks in her. She goes to the principal's office and reports every instance of discrimination she's witnessed. Her testimony becomes part of the growing file that Marcus is building. But Whitehaven fights back. Sophia is fired the next day, officially for budget cuts. Before she leaves, she slips Marcus a letter and her personal phone number. "Don't let them win," she writes. "Some things are worth losing everything for." The letter is intercepted by one of Lex's informants. Within hours, rumors of an inappropriate relationship between Marcus and Sophia spread across campus. Will, seeing an opportunity to finally destroy Marcus, takes the letter to the administration. Marcus is called into the principal's office. Dr. Blackwood, the principal, holds Sophia's letter like it's contaminated. "This," he says, his voice dripping with disgust, "is grounds for immediate expulsion. Leave campus by tonight." But Marcus doesn't move. Instead, he pulls out his phone and calls Richard Blackwood, putting him on speaker. The lawyer's voice fills the office. "Dr. Blackwood, I have here documented evidence of systematic racial discrimination, academic fraud, and administrative negligence at Whitehaven Academy. Should my client be expelled, these documents will be sent to every major news outlet and civil rights organization in the country." The color drains from Dr. Blackwood's face. "You're bluffing," he whispers. "Try me," Marcus responds, his voice steady. "I learned from the best how institutions protect their own. The only difference is, I learned how to fight back." A tense negotiation follows. By the end, Marcus has not only secured his place at Whitehaven but has also won significant concessions. The student disciplinary system will be overhauled. An independent diversity committee will be established. And most importantly, Sophia will be reinstated with back pay and a formal apology. But Marcus isn't finished. That night, he finds Lex alone in the library. The heir to the Winchester fortune flinches when Marcus sits down across from him. "I'm not here for revenge," Marcus says quietly. "I'm here to make you understand something. Your power, your privilege, it's borrowed. Mine? I earned every bit of it. Remember that next time you think about targeting someone weaker than you. Spring arrives at Whitehaven Academy, bringing with it winds of change. The once impenetrable fortress of privilege begins showing cracks. Marcus's victory over the administration has emboldened others to speak up. The halls that once echoed with slurs and taunts now buzz with conversations about equality and justice. But not everyone embraces this new reality. A core group of legacy students, led by a humiliated Lex and Will, plans their revenge. They can't touch Marcus directly anymore, he's too well protected now. But they can target those close to him. James becomes their first victim. They hack his computer, planting evidence that he's been selling test answers to scholarship students. The Academic Integrity Board, still dominated by old guard teachers, moves to expel him. The evidence seems irrefutable. Marcus, however, has learned to play their game. Working through sleepless nights with Richard Blackwood, they trace the digital fingerprints back to a computer in the Winchester family's private study room. More importantly, they uncover years of actual academic fraud, legacy students accessing test banks, bribing teachers, and manipulating grades. The showdown comes during a special assembly. Dr. Blackwood, under pressure from the board, plans to publicly expel James as a message to maintain Whitehaven's standards. But as James walks onto the stage, Marcus stands up. Let's talk about standards. His voice carries through the silent auditorium. Let's talk about the real corruption at Whitehaven. One by one, he projects evidence onto the giant screen behind the stage. Years of fraud, discrimination, and cover-ups flash before the assembled students and faculty. The audience watches in stunned silence as Marcus methodically exposes the systemic corruption that has festered within Whitehaven's walls. Parents in attendance, many unaware of how their children's legacy admissions really worked, shift uncomfortably in their seats. Lex stands up, face red with rage. You're destroying everything our family's built. No, Marcus responds calmly. I'm destroying the lies your family's built. There's a difference. The evidence is undeniable. By nightfall, 3 board members have resigned. Dr. Blackwood announces his early retirement. Lex and Will's families, desperate to avoid further scandal, withdraw their sons from the school. But Marcus's victory comes at a personal cost. During the chaos, he receives a call from his mother. His stepfather, enraged by Marcus's growing defiance and the changes he's forcing at his beloved alma mater, has turned his violence toward her. Marcus leaves campus immediately, Richard Blackwood at his side. They arrive at his house to find his mother with a bruised face, his stepfather raging. But this time, Marcus doesn't cower. This time, he's not alone. Touch her again, Marcus says, his voice carrying the weight of every lesson he's learned at Whitehaven. And I'll destroy you the same way I destroyed your precious school's reputation. Richard Blackwood steps forward, legal documents in hand. Divorce papers, restraining orders, evidence of years of abuse. Your choice, Robert, the lawyer says quietly. Leave now or we take everything. His stepfather, faced with the same kind of systematic dismantling that brought down Whitehaven's corrupt leadership, chooses to leave. As he walks out the door, Marcus calls after him. I learned from you, you know. Every time you beat me, you taught. David stands at the podium as student body president, a position once reserved exclusively for legacy students. The story of Marcus Johnson becomes Whitehaven legend, passed down through generations of students. Not as a tale of revenge, but as proof that even the most entrenched systems can be changed when someone is brave enough to stand up and smart enough to fight the right way. If you've stayed with us through this journey of justice and transformation, thank you. Don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories of courage and change. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying our opponents, but from transforming them into allies in the fight for what's right.